today we're going to be talking about an extremely important topic that is close to my heart. It's about school libraries, and I've got two amazing guests who know more about this than anybody else in the UK, and are going to help us explore some of those issues and what we need to be doing about making sure that we all have a good, active school library. So my guests today are Alison Tarrant, who is the CEO of the School Library Association, and she is also the co-chair of the Great School Libraries campaign. And Mary Rose Grieve, who is also co-chair of the Great School Libraries campaign, representing the SLG. Mary Rose is also a school librarian and she works at Heartland International School. So I'm going to welcome my guests. And here they are with their name tags, so you can work out which one is which. Very important that. Welcome both. I hope you're having a good week. So
yes, it's the wrong one.
We've got a lot to talk about, haven't we? And I suppose a really good starting point perhaps is to ask what each of you does in a little bit more detail. So, Alison, I've given your title, but what's your day-to-day like?
Well, there isn't such thing as a usual day-to-day. I think it's very similar to working in a school library, which I used to. So every day is slightly different, but my role is about making sure that the association is doing what we're supposed to be doing, so supporting our members effectively and kind of delivering on our strategic aims, I suppose.
How long has the School Library Association been going?
So last year we celebrated our 85th anniversary, which was amazing. So we did a series of events, including a round table at the Houses of Parliament. We had a gala dinner. We ran lots of competitions to kind of get pupils and members involved as well. So yeah, 86 years this year.
And I expect the association has seen a lot of change in that time. And hopefully we're going to see more change over the next few years, more positive change. Mary Rose, what's your day-to-day like?
Well, I work in a school library, and so like Alison, no 2 days are the same, like all school librarians know. I work in an international school in Dubai. So the school started in 2015, so it's quite a new school, and we started with a primary library. We've now got primary library, secondary library, staff library, and this year is the first year that I've been working with other people in my team. So that's quite exciting. I'm just about to finish an MPQSL, which has taken up quite a lot of time. And then when I have any more time, I work with Alison on the School Libraries campaign, and I'm a school governor of a school in the UK too, just to add into the mix.
I'm struck by the use of the word team in what you've just talked about. And I suspect one of the things we will need to think about is how a school librarian fits into a team. Otherwise, it can become a role that's quite isolated in the school. And how can you have the best impact unless you are part of a team? So we hopefully will come back to that a little bit. It's probably so obvious to both of you with the work that you do, but just for our viewers and our listeners, can you tell us about some of the most important reasons that we need school libraries for? There was a move maybe 10 years ago for schools, particularly primary schools, I think, to take libraries out and replace them with technology suites. I think that has stopped, and there's perhaps more reintroducing of libraries going on. But in case anybody needs that justification, what would you say are the main reasons? Maybe I'll start with you, Alison.
So one of the things that I love about advocating for school libraries is that there is actually such a wealth of evidence around the positive impacts that they have. And the best bit of research, if people are interested, is a summary one that Williams, Wavell and Morrison released in 2013. And they found that actually there were positive impacts on attainment in terms of exam outcomes, more positive attitudes and more positive outcomes in terms of how pupils perceived themselves as learners, and the additional skills around kind of digital and information literacy. So I think that's, I mean, what an amazing place to start. But I think there's also huge benefits around well-being in terms of both the activities that school libraries run, the library as it stands as a safe space for pupils to be. But I think there's also, relationships are built in the school library that wouldn't necessarily be built anywhere else in school. And pupils really get to uncover who they are through reading, through conversation, through learning, through the clubs and competitions. And it's just such a kind of all-rounder. And I think it's almost such a kind of all-rounder that sometimes that's to the detriment of the argument, because people like the kind of 10-second headline, it does this one thing really well. Whereas a school library is really a master of lots of different, beautiful, positive impacts.
You talked about relationships there. Do those relationships extend beyond the school to the community beyond? Is that an important reason for having one, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that school libraries, because they're not kind of strictly academic and they're not purely social, they hold this kind of third space in between the two. And it means that it's kind of a safer space for adults as well, potentially adults who had a hard time education when they attended school, or who have kind of lower literacy levels. It's less imposing, it's less overwhelming for quite a few people. But I think it's also, the ability to bring in authors and poets and illustrators and to build those relationships with parents, yes, but also other leaders in the local community. So for us, when we talk about building a reading community, we're never just talking about teachers and pupils. We're always talking about that much wider whole community perspective, which is what a school library can really do.
Mary Rose, I want to ask if there's anything that you would add to that, or whether you could give us some of the kind of practical examples of what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Alison says is absolutely right. I think what is so wonderful about a school library that makes it different from a public library is that our aims are so closely allied to the aims of the school, which is all about educating children and igniting that curiosity for learning, and just giving them the opportunity to go and find things out for themselves so that they can explore, find out information. All children are deeply curious. And how do we feed that curiosity without books that they can use? And having somebody, a professional person in the library, helping them to find those books and working really closely with teachers to ensure that the books that they're using in the classroom, that they're using for their curriculum time, are the best that they can be. And it's not just about reading for pleasure. It's not just about that bit, which of course is really important, but it's about learning and the academic pursuit that goes on in a school, both for teachers, parents, and children. It all starts there in the library. Lord Tope wrote a report in 2014 and called the library the beating heart of the school, and that really sums up exactly what Alison was saying about that third space, the sort of everything. It's the melting pot where everything happens, where children can come and be and understand themselves more because they're learning and moving through that process of finding things out and building their knowledge into understanding. And it is also important, sorry to interrupt, but this ChatGPT and this digital literacy, we have got to start equipping our children with these skills to be really critical readers now, because if there's a machine that's going to write things for you, you have to be able to read it and know and critique it and say, no, this isn't how I want it to be, I'm going to change it. You have to know how to find this information out, and school librarians are experts in that. That's our job. So I think that part is increasingly going to be really an important role that we play in school.
Really important points there, and I think that case that you've made for the difference between the school library and a public library is really important, because sometimes when I go into schools, and obviously it's all about setting priorities, there are limited budgets, etc., etc. What are we going to spend our money on? They will sometimes say, but we've got a public library down the road that we visit. It's not the same, is it, as having a library in your school? And going back to that report that you mentioned by Lord Tope and the beating heart of the school, nothing gives me greater joy than when I see a school that's been designed around the library and it's the first thing that you see when you walk through the door. And it kind of sets a tone for what that school's going to be like, I think. So we're stressing here the importance of the libraries, but, they're not just places with shelves with books on them. What is it that makes it a good library? What kind of qualities are you looking for? Maybe I'll start with Mary Rose this time.
Well, I think I know this is it sounds, well, I'm going to say there really should be somebody in it running it as a librarian or someone who knows the space and who knows how best to use it, because otherwise, as you say, it is just a room full of books that people come and take. But with somebody carefully curating and understanding what's going on, actually that room becomes something so much more, because that person can say, can see holistically what's going on across the whole school and say, right, we need to work a bit on this part of literacy. We've got all these different strands that encompass reading, literacy, learning, and I can help you by recommending some really good books for your classroom when you're doing science, or I can give these children a really lovely, cozy experience with a wonderful author with lots of new books that are coming in. So I think good stock. You have to have relevant stock that isn't, oh yeah, we've got a library, but you have a look and every book was published in 1982. You need to have new current books that appeal to the children. You need to have a person in there, and you need to have a space that's welcoming and a good place to use for everybody, that isn't used for 44 other different things, and somewhere to put the naughty children when they've misbehaved in class, or to run after school clubs, or to have coffee mornings in the morning, or whatever it is, that it is a space that you model. Children see how we think of books by how we act with them and what we do with them. And if we have a shelf in our bottom of our classroom with all the books scruffled up in the bottom, we're giving a message which says we're not that interested in books particularly. But if you've got a beautiful library with wonderful, and it's looked after, we're showing them the importance that books have.
I want to pick you up on a couple of things. Heaven forbid that I should ever disagree with you, but you seem to be implying that you shouldn't run an after-school club in a library.
Oh, no. Sorry. I think what I meant was that it's not a place for a whole load of children to wait for the bus without doing anything. Of course, you should run after-school clubs in the library, using the library as a space. We have a very successful Reading Gladiators book club at the moment, our Carnegie shadowing groups that happen after school. So absolutely a place for those sorts of things to happen, but not as a place where, oh, look, we've got 24 children, we don't know what to do with them. We'll just shove them in the library until the bus comes.
Right.
Things
could be different. Kind of tangentially related to books and reading. I mean, a Lego club. Would you have a Lego club in the library? Seems to me like a good...
Oh, yes. Yes, because it's magical. Because then you not only do you have your Lego club, but you're making things that you read in books, and it's the most wonderful way to talk about books in translation. I'm really excited about children understanding how books are translated from one thing to the other. We've got a lot of children in our school who are from lots of different languages, and actually being able to see, if you give them an instruction of how to make something out of wooden bricks, but you give them Lego to do it, it's a really interesting way for them to understand how translators work with translating books from one to the other. So there's lots of wonderful things, origami clubs and all sorts of things, but all of those are related to learning books and finding things out. So it's definitely, it's a space for inquiry, however that shows itself.
So it's about being intentional about the use of the space and understanding that. I wanted to come to, and maybe Alison, I can address this to you. Mary Rose has talked about the importance of the librarian, but not everybody who works in a school library, particularly I think in primary school, is going to be a qualified librarian. There'll be a library worker of some kind, and we need to value what they do, but they may not have the same level of skills that Mary Rose is talking about. What's the School Library Association's perspective on that?
So, yeah, thank you. So the School Library Association supports anyone involved with school libraries. So for us, it doesn't matter if you are, chartered, qualified, have been doing it in that capacity for 20 years, or if you are kind of a TA who's got 2 hours a week to kind of run the school library. And our support kind of spreads across all of that. We have a trustee at the moment who was a deputy head and is now a head of a primary school, and she is also responsible for the school library because there's no one else with that specific responsibility, and she felt it was incredibly important. So she joined the SLA and then became one of our trustees. And I think it's very tempting to, and as Mary Rose has just kind of touched on, there are lots of kind of ideals that we can talk about in terms of what makes a good or what makes a great school library. But the campaign isn't about trying to isolate anyone or make any school feel like what they're doing isn't good enough. It's about saying, actually, this is the ideal, because we do see from the conversations that we have a lot of people who don't seem to understand either the benefits, the impact, or what the ideal could be. So it's about saying, look, this is what could be happening in your school and how your school library could be functioning. But here are the things that you can do to kind of take a step towards that. So it's, the campaign is absolutely not about saying that, anyone who's currently looking after a school who isn't qualified shouldn't be doing that. We absolutely should. And we, want to say thank you to those people for ensuring that those children have a school library. But it is about saying, as a collective, as a country, what are the standards that we want to achieve with our education system over the next 10 years? Where is our education system looking to? What are the skills that we want to develop in our pupils? And how do we get there? And when we have that conversation as school librarians, we're seeing that the skills that school libraries and, those people, who are trained, however that may be, the skills that they support are becoming ever more important, because it's not just about about the books. It is about learning, it is about curiosity, it is about those kind of softer skills of leadership, and pupil library assistants are a great example of that, and creativity. Quite often we talk about being creative in the sense of creative writing or drawing or illustration, but the act of reading is creativity in itself. And the school library is a place where you can just sit and be creative, because you don't have to be doing something for a purpose. You're given the kind of time and space to just be and to just think and to just do. And so, I think anyone who is helping to run a school library is helping those children get the best education that they can. And it is our role to stand up and saying, what you are doing is important. And it's so important. We should be having a national conversation about this, because, you know, the stats that we're seeing around teacher retention and teacher recruitment and teacher workload, are we really okay with running a system where we're saying that reading is completely fundamental and that learning is an essential thing, and yet not providing enough support staff to enable teachers to do their jobs? I think it's absolutely ludicrous that we are expecting teachers to be able to keep 100% up to date with absolutely everything that's going on in children's publishing and information literacy. You know, where does it end? At some point, we've got to say, there are people here who can help you do this. And that's what the campaign is trying to say.
Can I just ask you, use the word step, like a step towards, which I think is very helpful. You've got an end goal, but there are ways to get there, maybe incrementally. And sometimes we see the need once we're on the ladder, as it were. We can see what the next step might be, and the step after that. Is there anywhere, or do you, either of you, have in mind what that might look like? You know, if you are at this level, then this will help you move to the next step. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working on a resource where it says, you know, if this is where you are right now, this is some things that you can consider. And if this is your kind of starting point, then consider these things. So we're working on that for both kind of primaries and secondary schools. And it's really one of those things that we want to be really, really helpful. So we're taking time to consider as many contexts as we can. I'm sure that it won't be all of them, but we want it to be really, really helpful for as many schools as possible.
Gosh, that sounds incredibly helpful, and missing piece of the jigsaw at the moment, but that sounds great.
I think, and one of the, in the creation of that, what is really important is that we sort of ally ourselves to the school and the school leaders, so that we're not, that school libraries and librarians and what we're doing doesn't seem as a sort of adjunct to it, but that we're these steps we're going to be giving are going to be much more centered from, how you do it as a school leader, not how you would do it as a librarian, if you see what I mean. So that there's a support. It comes from every different area, and we're obviously working with government and policymakers at one level to get them to join that conversation and to understand the value that a school librarian can bring, that goes way beyond being giving them books to read at home or reading for pleasure, but that they're integral to the teaching and learning. So but when we create those toolkits, they're going to be ones that we're doing in conjunction with school leaders and people that work in schools who can, so the advice will not just be specific to librarians and school libraries, but to everyone, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it has to be a leadership thing, because that's what will bring about the change. It needs to be working in both directions, doesn't it? I haven't even asked you yet what the Great School Libraries campaign is and what its aims are and exactly what the plans are. So perhaps we ought to summarise that for our viewers. Alison.
Yeah, so the Great School Libraries campaign started in 2019, and it came out of a kind of real feeling that there'd been a previous report, which Mary Rose has already mentioned, called The Beating Heart of the School, released in 2014, which highlighted key things that needed to be done in order for the school library sector to kind of move forward. And unfortunately, not many of those had been acted on. So the primary one, which the sector has been struggling against, is the fact questions related to school libraries, school librarians, or reading provision in the school library census. in the school census, which means we don't know how many there are in the country. So it's very hard to kind of really have a solid understanding of what the issues are around provision when that data isn't being collected. So the first task was to kind of have to collect the data. We released our first report in 2019, and we've just followed up by releasing our kind of second research into school library provision across the UK, which we launched at the House of Lords in March, and we were delighted that you were able to join us for that. So the first kind of key aim is around actually what does provision look like, because that underpins everything else. And then it's about also saying what is the ideal, where do we want school libraries to go over the next kind of 10 years, and trying to kind of pull together and garner different bodies to enable that to happen. So there's a big piece of work that we're trying to kind of activate within schools themselves, within school leaders. And we're not just talking about in schools, but, educationalists, those people who are leading the way in the education landscape, who maybe don't have the best understanding of what they deliver. So I probably shouldn't say this, but the Times Education Commission released a report last year, and it was one of those ones that you get excited about because it's about a vision for education and where education is going to go over the next kind of 10 years. And I was genuinely devastated, partly because support staff were maybe given half a sentence somewhere, as if schools could just run without them. But the kind of the conclusion was that we should move towards an education system that works more like an English baccalaureate. And that is a system that requires information and library skills, research skills. And if you're an IB in a school at the moment, then you have to have a librarian. It is one of the requirements. And so for secondary school libraries to be completely ignored, I felt was just symptomatic of the misunderstanding around what school libraries do. But actually more gutting than that almost was the fact that they said every primary school should have a school library, but we don't need to fund them. Their suggestion was that we could put a donation box at the end of the school drive and rely on parents in the community to do that. And I just think if ever there was a way to embed the kind of the opposite of levelling up, that is it. I mean, how can we as a nation of people who believe in education and who know that reading underpins so much of what else goes on and outcomes at the end of the day, are we genuinely turning around and saying that even in an ideal world, even if we are creating a vision, there is no need to fund a primary school library? I just felt that was, betrayal is quite a strong word, but it really just showed the work that the campaign has.
I would suggest that looking at teacher training is interesting as well. I'm not knocking, I come from that background, teacher training, and I'm definitely not knocking it. But I know when I've visited colleagues on certain courses that you can tell instantly, just as you can when you walk into a school where the library is the beating heart. When you work with students on a particular training course, you can see that they also have been taught the value of the library. And you go into the university library and there is a section that is set up like a school library or a children's library, but that isn't in every training institution. So I don't know whether that's something that you have looked at. Maybe it seems like a next step, but it seems like quite an important one.
No, it definitely is, because I don't think there's any, there's a difficulty, isn't there, if we focus on changing the hearts and minds of current educational leadership, that then we're just going to have to repeat it, and with current retention not too far down the road. And actually, that's one of the things that both SLA and SLG kind of do, is outreach to teacher training. And I, deliver training for PGCE students, talking about reading for pleasure, information literacy, and the role of the school library and the support that they could expect. Always have some really interesting conversations as a result.
Mm.
The other people, sorry, Nikki, but just quickly, the other people who we are also going to be talking to, that's an interesting angle, is that is university librarians, because they get our students from school at A level coming to university, and these students that are coming out of school don't have the skills that they need them to have. The university librarians are increasingly teaching them, having to teach them all the things that they really should have learnt in school about how to find information out for yourself. And so joining the circle, both with teachers and with the students too, is what's really important here. That we're it's all part of one great process. We're not letting these children go off to university completely unable to do anything. I mean, that is partly to do with the fact that the curriculum doesn't have any of that built into it. Nowhere are they expected to be able to show that they can research and use those skills, but we can't expect our colleagues in university libraries to be starting from the beginning, which is what they're having to do. So that's another area that we're looking at too. So we're just making a case to.
I want to talk in a moment about some of the things that teachers, school leaders can do to support the campaign. But before we get there, I've got one other question. It's to do with data gathering. And it's great you've done this research and you've found out a little bit more about what provision is like. I wonder if anybody's doing any research into places where there aren't libraries and the reasons that people give for that, why there isn't something there.
It is actually one of the questions that we asked as part of the research. So there were some schools who answered the survey who said that they don't have a school library. And where that was the case, we then asked them some questions around how do they provide that. And it was really interesting because 85% of those respondents who said that they don't have a school library said that the reason was because of space constraints. And I think that's a testament to the pressures that schools are under in terms of increased pupil numbers and, needing extra buildings. And I think, we definitely see that in, being shown through, schools that kind of get a double-decker bus. I've seen a narrowboat school library. And there was one in the news a couple of months ago about a head who got in kind of half of a jet plane to create a school library. And I think it shows, on the one hand, it shows that these are our heads and schools who clearly understand, some of the benefit that it's worth taking that action to provide the space that they can. But why are they having to do that? Why isn't there more support for building a school library? Because school libraries aren't statutory. If you build a new school, you have to find the funding yourself. It's not funded as part of that new build, and you have to steal space from other areas to make it worthwhile. So that's also, a conversation that we want to follow up with policymakers in terms of what are realistic recommendations for schools, and when schools want a school library, how can we help them to do that rather than adding fundraising onto an already very busy to-do list.
Let's come to thinking about the practicalities and what school leaders and teachers can do at a school level. How can they lend their voices or action? What should they be doing?
There's a lot of things they can do. Well, first of all, they can campaign and write to their local MP we've got a template letter on the Great School Libraries website, and lots of people have written to their local MP, and we've had questions tabled in the House of Commons already. So the more people that write in to the government to say we need these things, our voice must be heard, I think the better it is. So on a macro level, that's what you can do. But actually, if you're a school with no school library at all, there are lots of things you can do about fundraising with the PTA, about getting donations from people to come in and bring books, finding just a little space somewhere, and even in a corridor, but that's beautifully put together, with the books beautifully shown and displayed, and showing that they're valued, and then monitoring the effect that has. I think always any change you make in school, however small, if you can show that that's had an impact, you then are building evidence to be able to go and say, look, I've got this shelf, I've put this shelf in, and I've got parents to fundraise. The difference it's made to my children in my class is this, and this, and their scores have gone up. And then you've got yourself a little piece of evidence that then you go to someone and say, now, with this evidence, let's do the next thing. And you're always evidencing what you do. And the more evidence you get, the more support you get behind you, and the more chance you have for someone further up the school, the head teacher or whoever, to say, actually, right, we're gonna really go for this, and we're going to get some real money, and we're going to find another way to do it. So starting small and evidencing that impact that you make is just crucial, I think.
Alison, would you add anything to what people can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you haven't, been familiar previously with the research around school libraries, I'd really recommend you have a look. There is a page on the Great School Libraries website. And, the research that's come out recently, so Book Trust did a brilliant campaign with Cressida Cowell when she was Children's Laureate called Life Changing Libraries. And they actually put school libraries into 6 primary schools. And the report really highlights the wealth of benefits, not just for the pupils or the staff or their relationship, although it benefited all 3, but also for the community. And there are 2 quotes from that report that I'm just going to share. One was from a pupil who, when he was asked why the school library was important and what difference it had made, he said, "It means I don't have to read the same book again and again." The second one was from a head teacher who said that she had been looking for an intervention to close the gap and to kind of accelerate the learning of her pupils for years. And it turns out all she needed was a school library. And I think if you put those 2 together, there's much more in there. But I think sometimes particularly with teachers, and I don't mean this in a rude way at all, but I think sometimes with teachers, there is a perception that school libraries are not necessarily part of their thing. And I certainly see that in my work for the School Library Association, that when I start to talk to teachers, they see it as an association that's not for them. But school libraries are there for the whole of the education community. And as the organisations behind the campaign, we're desperate to support you, because for us, as with you, it's about the pupils at the end of the day. And it's our bread and butter. So I would really encourage people who are maybe starting to think about this for the first time or want to explore it, don't hesitate to have a look at their campaign, or to have a look at CILIP and the School Libraries Group or the School Library Association, because we all want the same thing. We all want to support those pupils to get the best outcomes they can.
Just to sum up, and maybe we can do this with just a few headline points. How can the SLA practically support schools who are looking to either reintroduce a library or set one up for the first time, or to develop their library? What can you offer?
So I think for the School Library Association, we run an advice line. We have publications. We have a quarterly journal that looks at best practice in school libraries. Some of our publications, thank you. Some of our publications do focus specifically on new school libraries. We have a page on our website for putting a new school library in. But for me, it's the advice line. So we also do consultancy, so we can come out to your school and give you kind of an all-round perspective. But if you just want, initial thoughts around something, give us a call, drop us an email, and we'll get back to you. And the Great School Libraries campaign, we'll also take those emails and we'll share them, we'll pass them on to the organisations behind the campaign. So that's a really good way to kind of get in touch if you've got any questions.
Certainly an association that I recommend to just about every school that I go into as a first step when they're thinking about this, because it can be quite isolating. I know that you have said very clearly it's not just about the library workers, but it's for the whole school. But those library workers can also feel quite isolated, and I just think you're the handshake, you're their community, and I think that is absolutely vital. Can SLG offer anything for school libraries?
Yes. So SLG, the School Libraries Group, is a special interest group of CILIP, which is the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals. SLG and CILIP are the place to go when you want to take your career and become professionalised or chartered through CILIP. And the School Libraries Group is a similarly to SLA, is a committed group of people who together are working to amplify our profession, to help people who want to move their career forward. We give training, conferences, all kinds of support, and there's lots of things on our website. We've a few members of the committee have just written a book called Creating a School Library with Impact, a beginner's guide, which is also another great resource to have at your fingertips when you're starting up. So we the SLG and SLA do lots of similar things, but then we're working together. We're all doing the same thing really, which is to promote school libraries and school librarians, and to try and get everybody to understand the importance of what we can do in a school and the impact that we can have for the children.
We've covered quite a lot of territory in our time, but before we go, I want to give you the opportunity, if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you think absolutely needs saying. So any gaps, anything that we must tell people, or do you think we've done a reasonable job?
I think one of the things that I would just add is I would encourage people to go and read the whole report, but teachers are busy people. So just to cover, I think the research, both in 2019 and the latest report, found that school library provision was really, really unequal. And that's not necessarily a surprise to anyone, I don't think. But I do think that we really need to think about the impact that that's having on some of the wider challenges that education is facing. I mean, we talk a lot about kind of levelling up and closing the gap. And I'm sure, Nikki, that you've had multiple conversations around the Matthew effect, in terms of the readers who read more will read more and read better and gain more. And for me, if we're then talking about, so the latest research found that school library provision was less likely in schools that had higher percentages of children eligible for free school meals. And they're also, if they have the space, less likely to have staff and more likely to have less resources. So just the quality of provision is far to a lower standard. So I think for me, it's just kind of doubling that sort of Matthew effect that we talk about, and it may be an unseen thing. And yes, there are also much bigger things, but I think it's one of those pieces of the jigsaw that we really shouldn't be overlooking in terms of trying to change some of that bigger, or achieve some of that bigger change that we're looking for.
And for me, what you've said there takes it to not being about an individual school, but it's about the responsibility of all of us. Even if our school is okay and we have a good school library, I do feel that as educators, that our responsibility is to all schools, and to make that point that you've just made exceptionally clearly to everyone that we come into contact with, frankly.
Yeah. And I do think, sorry, Mary Rose, just to
sorry.
add, one of the easiest things that you could do is to actually, if you have a school library, tell your parents, tell the community, tell the carers of your children that you have a school library, because so many parents assume that they are statutory, and so they just assume that it's part and parcel. And actually, if you kind of can just make that clear, like we have one, we fund one, reading is important to us, learning is important to us, it's staffed, this is how we do it, whatever that looks like, those are all really important things that just kind of help edge knowledge about school libraries slightly further forward.
Fabulous. Any last words, Mary Rose?
No, I think that what Alison said is exactly right. This is a social justice issue. This is about what kind of society do we want to be? How are we making sure that our children are critically thinking about what happens and are equipped to move into this brave new world? It's often said that we're preparing children for jobs we don't even know exist. I think that's probably been the case forever, but now perhaps more than ever, are we really making is our curriculum and what we're teaching the children really making them ready for their next stage, for university or jobs or whatever else it is? And we all know that the more we read, this audience particularly, the more we read, the better it is. And it is a matter of social justice that our children have access to a school library, and all of them should. It shouldn't matter where you live, what kind of school you're at, or where you come from, or whether you have free school meals or not. Everyone should have a school library, because we are a civilized society, and that's what we're about. And it is awful that we're still having to have this conversation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, Alison, Mary Rose. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.